If you follow the news closely, and surely there's no surprise, and I don't need to tell you that how complicated the political game today since Donald Trump took office. Now, you might heard this breaking news that Princeton University said several dozens of federal grants have been halted, and it's just the latest Trump administration move targeting colleges. As a matter of fact, recently, one professor in the Department of Philosophy from Yale University decided not only he's leaving the school, but also he's leaving the country, and he has already decided to teach at the University of Toronto. How should we understand that? As a matter of fact, that if we look at the first 100 days within the Trump administration, not only that he did a lot of shakeup with the partnership of Elon Musk, and also right now Donald Trump has been dancing with the idea he's not even done with the second term yet, but he's thinking about doing it again for the third term, and perhaps that even that's something to do with a constitutional change. Putting everything together, what do we understand about that? And what about this ongoing relationship between China and US at this moment? Hypothetically, if Donald Trump were to run for the third term, what does that signify for China and also for the whole world? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker. Again, it's not a stranger to our show, which is Dr. Michael Patrick. And he's a well-known international journalist, and he is a scholar on international relationships. Well, Michael, welcome back to the show. What do you want to say? What do you want to tell us?
Well, thank you, Will, for inviting me. It's fascinating that the amount of news coming out on a daily basis, it's like drinking from a fire hose. There's something new going on every day out of the Trump administration, but also on the world stage. You mentioned the idea of a third term, and I think that catches people's attention. I want to draw your attention to the kind of leaders that we can see on the world stage these days. Trump, I've asked my students, is Trump following in the footsteps of other leaders with large visions? If you look at China and the Belt and Road, a huge vision. And the president, in order to accomplish that means, has extended his stay in the presidency. Putin feels much the same way in his own sense of having a very unique vision that involves all of Europe, by the way, and a newly constituted Russian Federation that he would like to accomplish. He realizes that takes time. He has engineered himself to be reelected. And I'm not really making comment on the different political systems. I'm simply saying that they share a lot of traits as leaders. I think Trump is of the same mind. He's really beginning to realize that he bit off more than he can chew in a 4-year period. And I think part of Trump wants to continue moving. He may have to move through other people to accomplish that vision, but that's not uncommon to have a world-changing leader with a great vision, whether you like the vision or you do not like it, to want to think about how do I accomplish my legacy. And that's the context, I think, which we best understand it with Trump, is looking at his unique traits as a leader, plus or minus, and realize what he's done in the last 100 days, which has launched far more sorts of major changes than he'll be able to accomplish in 4 years. He may need some partners along the way for that to happen.
Well, Michael, since you mentioned, again, something that I touched on at the beginning about the third term for President Trump. Now, I'm looking at the article from one of the most well-known online magazine. It's called The Atlantic. Now, within the article, that it mentioned that Trump told NBC, and I quote, "A lot of people want me to do it. I am not joking." Michael, you have been in the political game for so long, and also you covered presidential debates and presidential campaign, and even for the presidencies. Now, again, as I mentioned before, Trump is not even done with the second term yet, but right now he's taunting with the idea of running for the third term. Can you help us with better understanding from the constitutional perspective? How does that work? Or some people argue that by using those statements, Trump is again ignoring the constitutional rules or the constitutional principles. Are we thinking the right thing, or Trump is too crazy at this moment to thinking about extend his presidency? What do you say to that?
Well, crazy like a fox. There's no chance of getting another term for Donald Trump. I think anyone who is using any amount of reason within the American system would say that up front. But you can ignore the fact that he is talking about finding ways to extend his legacy. With all of the major changes that he's proposed, he's not going to do that in 4 years. Neither are other major world leaders with large visions for their country able to do it in a single term. So we can begin to understand something about how these unique characters work. And they share, actually, political systems aside, as leaders, some very similar characteristics with a much larger vision for what they want to accomplish than they could possibly do in a handful of years. So the question is, how do you accomplish it? Right now, none of these leaders, I think, are the pragmatic leader of managing the kinds of things they do and considering their responsibilities from a management point of view. What they're looking at these challenges is from a visionary point of view. How do I get from where I'm at today to another location, but not through the typical kinds of leadership, administrative management methods that we're used to, but by creating whole new environments with which to operate. Belt and Road is a global vision for China. Now, it starts with the China that it knows, which is very internally oriented, but we're already seeing that begin to change as China expands its influence worldwide. And these are the things to be expected from these sorts of leaders, is a grander vision than they could possibly do. I don't think anybody's sitting down in the White House and calculating a constitutional move. They realize he's expressing something about the nature of his vision more than what he's able to in a linear way accomplish day after tomorrow. And that's true for other major global types of leaders. And so you have to listen to what they're saying and not what you imagine could be done in a very practical sense. There's no way for Donald Trump to get a third term in the United States of America. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't take consideration for this level of force and approach that he has taken to accomplish things. I mean, who talks about taking over other nations? We can think of a few countries that have got ambitions and ideas. And then Trump all of a sudden is talking about Greenland, is talking about, creating states out of parts of Canada. I mean, these things are beyond the pale of anything he's going to practically accomplish anytime soon. There happens to be another planet living out there, and they have different ideas. But we need to weigh and evaluate what this tells us about what to expect next from that leader. What can we look at that leader and their leadership qualities, plus and minus, and what can we expect them to do? To just sit quietly in the corner and run out their time and hold state banquets? No. We expect them that they're going to make some changes out there. And we should anticipate that. And so from a point of view of making sense of it, we can't look at the practicalities of management and administration. We have to look at where this character and his grand vision is going to take us, for better or worse.
Michael, talk about Canada. again, as we mentioned at the beginning of the taping, that you mentioned you are half of Canadian as well. But again, going back to the breaking news that a philosophy professor from Yale University decided not only to quit the job in university, but also he's leaving the country, and he has already decided to teach at the University of Toronto. And I know that you are also located overseas as well, and I hope that you don't share the same reason with that professor. But I do want to ask is, you study leadership and also you teach classes on leadership. What does that say about Trump's leadership style? Because we know that if we look at internally, some people argue that America today is more divided than ever, politically speaking, and also we'll look at this economic gap as well. But from the other perspective, people are also rooting for the idea that Trump finally is the person pull back America back on the right track. So again, from your perspective, why do you think within the field of academia or within the field of politics, people are not seeing Trump as a leader to readjust the track for US, but instead continue to use the word as political threat, a dictatorship, or even some call it the centuries for American demise? Why do you think that people are not buying into the idea that Trump is doing something good for the country and not actually bringing the, say, the destruction or the detrimental effects to the country?
Well, that's a really good question. I think one of the most obvious responses is that half of the country disagreed with Trump going into office. And we can talk percentages. And yes, he had a sweeping victory at the election. But we're not talking about this being anywhere near a united country, as you mentioned. There are people for whom his basic premise while he was running for office was too much to bear. And it's understandable that many people want to move overseas and live in a different culture. And that's perfectly understandable. You have a division. An academic term would be mimetic tribes that are living separately from each other and don't see eye to eye on any front. Also, though, the impact of Donald Trump upon the Washington mentality, that's the community that has been uprooted and its way of doing things. For example, much has been made about the USAID and the way that it provided aid all over the world in tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars in aid worldwide. What nobody was really talking about was that it also provided a cover for the Central Intelligence Agency to get involved in a lot of its activities without getting a presidential finding to do so. That's a little bit more difficult. That's a little more challenging. How was the money spent? And one of the things that they call it DOGE, which is a look at government spending, has found is trillions of dollars literally that have dropped off the map that has not been gone to help Americans of every political persuasion. So there's some real crises going on within Washington. I'm more astonished that he has taken on so many international efforts to get involved with when his home front, which is got grave challenges facing it right now, but he is, as it were, has taken on a great deal of new projects, both domestically and internationally, that people wonder, where is this going, and how do we stand up and cope with this level of change? So the United States is split. I think it's by no means cohesive, even within the Republican sphere, however you want to measure that, simply by the size and scope of the kinds of things that Trump's doing. I don't think we know the outcome of it yet. Right now, I will say that throughout Europe Everyone is expecting war. They do not expect this peace negotiations to work. Germany added their name to the list. They changed their tax process to put a lot more resources into war. And I can walk through this nation by nation in Europe. They do not see this as turning out well for them. So people are bracing for the reduction of or collapse of NATO as they've known it. And that's a whole story in and of itself, but also the potential for war with Russia. So this is a volatile environment, not just in the U.S., but in Europe and elsewhere when you start adding things like trade and economies into the mix.
Michael, speaking of trade, I want to bring China into our conversation. Again, as you mentioned before moving overseas to another country, that you actually spend good amount of time in China, again, working and also covering important events. But recently, there has been several talks, either on the streets or on the table, that there's a possibility that Trump is going to meet the Chinese leader. I don't want to use the word soon, but it's expected that the two leaders will encounter each other. But given the fact that today, when we look at this global shape-up, trade or this economic agenda surely top the priorities. And that's number one. And number two, another piece of fact is Trump placed more tariffs upon China or the Chinese commodities, and which has not received any positive news from the Chinese government. So from your perspective, for years of understanding leadership or studying leadership or even understand the personalities and the traits of people, how do you think that Trump is able to understand this possible Trump and Xi summit, and not anytime soon, but it's expected to take place between the two leaders? How do you think that we understand the two leaders at this moment? Are they even interested in meeting up in the midst of the trade war or in the midst of the economic uncertainty? Or there could be something that for both countries put on the back burner until things in Ukraine start to settle down, or even perhaps that domestically for China and US can get less noisy or less chaos, fewer chaos, and then maybe find a time to meet. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, I believe that order comes out of chaos, that chaos creates opportunity for creativity and for solutions. Now, that's not a justification for creating chaos, which is what we have going on. I think that it would be a fantastic meeting between President Xi and President Trump. I think they are the style of leaders that have a number of things in common. I could fill a board talking about the things that are common amongst some of these leaders that have a world level vision. And I think that there's some positives that can come out. I think, as I think we can all agree by just looking at the numbers, China would like to see more consumption, both overseas and domestically. It's pushing forward a tremendous growth and tremendous potential in all sorts of areas. Chips, for example, and the next level of development with AI, and we can begin to see lots of positive things that are out there. But there needs to be some more cooperation, and I think the United States could benefit from a better relationship with China and China as well. So I don't see them as much at odds as I see opportunity. It's like when is opportunity, and what is it? The definition of opportunity is danger involving opportunity. I think while it may seem dangerous, I think that, and there's a lot of chaos right now over the idea of tariffs and for whose tariff is what tariff, and Trump it seems to be enamored with tariffs. But out of that chaos, I think a better relationship with China could benefit both parties tremendously. And so I'm looking for some positive things coming out of a meeting with these two gentlemen. They share a lot alike.
Michael, I want to read one statement to you. During one interview, a scholar from the Institute of International Studies at Fudan University in Shanghai, this is what the scholar said, and I want to get your explanation or perhaps interpretation on that. And I quote, "The Chinese side believes the Trump administration has not really figured out what is the way to deal with China and make a deal," end quote. From a Chinese national perspective, let me share with you what I think, or in general, what we think. Certainly that we know that this is not the first time that we're dealing with Donald Trump. And back in 2016, that was basically the introduction of the Trump presidency to the whole world and also to China. We look at how Trump delegated 4 years through domestic and also international policy. When it came to trade war, no one was happy, especially from the Chinese perspective. Younger generations tend to see Trump as a cartoonistic character. Again, understand how to put on the show business, understand how to delegate himself in front of public. But when it comes to relationship with China, majority of the people believe that Trump failed during the first term in order to, again, in terms of dealing with China. But right now, we're coming to the second term. We're still looking at Trump administration place tariffs upon Chinese commodities. Now, at this moment, putting the Ukraine war on the side, putting all the international uncertainty on the side, we're still hoping that the Trump administration is able to recognize the power and the presence of China, especially when it comes to collaboration, instead of posing issues or questions upon China. Why not work together? So when I look at the statement I just read to you, personally speaking, Michael, I have to say partially right. Maybe the Trump administration has not really taken the time to understand how to deal with China and also to make a deal. That's just what I think. I want to hear your input, Michael.
Well, I agree. I don't think we've seen that attention, that laser-like focus to turn that way. I'm surprised that he threw issues in there like Greenland and Canada and Mexico, even though they are gigantic partners. I think in trade. So I'm surprised he took those issues first. But I think eventually China is the growth and the future of this particular century. And whether anybody wants to acknowledge that publicly is another issue. But the United States can't accomplish the things that Trump envisions without China. And it's not just a matter of figuring out how to leave each other alone. That's not a possibility. There's no way to on the same planet for these two countries just to kind of happily go their own way and, okay, we'll come out with this little deal and we'll both be happy and we'll leave each other alone. That's not going to happen. They both have great visions and are run by leaders that unique, like entrepreneurs, have a lot of the same traits. World leaders, like these two gentlemen, share some interesting traits. They have to work together. They're going to have to learn how to accomplish their vision for the world with the other partner involved. They're not. This is a multipolarity world, as it may be known. It's not unipolarity. It's not even bipolarity. It's a multipolarity. So you have to work with those other players. I'm agreeing that they haven't found the language yet. I think they need the relationship first. I think this is not just something you're going to conquer on paper and get the numbers to look good. I think you're going to have a relationship that can endure through those difficult moments when they figure out that they don't get everything the way they wanted it, but they can still come to some understanding about the sphere of influence that they have and what they'll be able to do within that sphere of influence and with the other person engaged. There are no quick answers here. And second terms may or may not, or third terms may not accomplish it. So I think the initial meeting, having watched President Xi do the things he's done with China and establishing it as the global power that it is, he's got a lot to get done. And I think they'll both play a role in each other's vision for the future, whatever that may be, and however differently that may be. A lot of people object to considering them in the same breath, but quite frankly, I'm not passing judgment on vision. I'm saying that like entrepreneurs share some traits, so do people such as Trump and Xi and even Putin to a degree. So we're going to have to see how that plays itself out. Right now, there is no agreement that's going to settle the war in Ukraine anytime soon. And Europe is recognizing that, and they've kind of made their bets. But I'm very interested in that meeting. I'd love to be listening in when they have their first meeting between President Xi and Trump. I think it's going to be an extraordinary event.
Michael, I want to wrap up our conversation by talking about another issue. I know that this is something that you have been paying attention regarding the missing soldiers. Number one, can you tell us a little bit about the background? What really happened, and why do you think this is also crucial to Donald Trump or even to the international community? Let's start from there. What happened exactly, and why do you think that we also need to pay attention, not just for the news headlines, but also for the bigger picture? Why is that important for us?
Well, it takes on less potential than I thought it might at first, because Belarus has grabbed people on the other side of the border before, so that's one of the first things that was suspicious to me. And no soldiers can go AWOL all the time. That means absent without leave, going off on a toot somewhere. But you don't sink a multi-million-dollar craft and do it unless you want to spend the rest of your life in Leavenworth in prison. So that to me was not on the table. But as it turns out, they died in a sinkhole, basically a swamp area on the border. And in talking to people that have had experience in dredging and hearing the kind of local experience that comes into play, Lithuania has already said within the last 2 weeks they expect war. It's not if, but it's when war. And they begin to put up some different kinds of devices and things along the border that would slow the tanks and other things rolling into their country crossing the border, that would slow it down. There's all sorts of anti-tank and other weaponry that's put in there. Somebody told me a story, which I tend to lean towards, but this is only an anecdote, that these bogs, you can look at an open field and be walking across it, and you're doing just fine, but you step in the wrong area and suddenly you disappear. It's where the ocean comes in, the water comes in and softens up the dirt, and you can just disappear in a heartbeat. And if you have a vehicle, that whole vehicle can disappear. And this is apparently a phenomenon. Well, somebody suggested the other day that perhaps some of these bogs that swallowed a whole huge piece of machinery that they were driving could have easily been one of these engineered bogs to basically slow down an invading army. I have no idea, but that tended to help me understand how you lose 4 soldiers and large military equipment, where it vanishes, and they find it not only under about 15 feet of water, but also another 6 meters of mud and bog. And I asked a fellow in dredging, I said, why did it take them a week to find these guys? And he said, I'm surprised they were able to get it out in a week. He said, having worked in dredging, he said, when you have something gets buried in those bogs, it takes sometimes much longer than a week to get it out. That's just a fun mystery. I'm glad that it isn't Belarus grabbing soldiers, because then we would have a complication pretty fast. One of the things out of Biden's administration, when 13 American soldiers were killed in Afghanistan, and I don't want to debate that issue, but just to say that hurt that hurt Kamala Harris's chances of getting elected, because Americans do not react well, no matter what party they are, if you mess with their soldiers. So who knows? That's more than you wanted to know, but that's what we've been hearing here in Lithuania.
Well, I mean, again, Michael, it's so interesting to understand, even to know the unknowns. But again, as we mentioned initially, regardless whether Trump is serious or he's joking about the third term, I believe at the end of the day, what we need right now, or what the world needs right now, it's less chaos and more in order. And I think you and I, we had multiple conversations. Donald Trump or the Chinese leader or Putin, I don't want to put them all in the same box, but we are seeing them as disruptors. So in other words, maybe it's time in 2025, we should embrace, we should welcome the disruptors, and so that we can see how things can be placed in order. So in other words, it's time to break the old game. It's time to reshape up the political system, the economic structures, in order to prepare what's ahead of us. Well, again, Michael, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. And again, thank you so much to be on the show every time. And again, as I mentioned before, I know you're not considering moving to Canada yet, but if you do, please let us know. I'm sure that the professor, whoever decided to move to Canada, will love to connect with you. And hopefully next time when we talk, you will be teaching at the University of Toronto. So thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thank you very much. You bring up interesting topics, and you're brave to do so. I am looking for as much order out of this chaos as anyone else. And there's some outrageous stuff going on right now, and it really is truly outrageous. But now we have to learn, how do we make order out of that chaos? And that's what separates winners from losers.
That's right.